Divorce lawyers. What's the most cruel thing you've ever seen someone do to their ex-partner? She arranged his murder? She called him from a remote location saying she had a flat tire and could not get home. Even though they had been separated for months, he loaded up his tools in a spare and drove out to her car where the wife's new boyfriend attacked him. Story 2. Not a divorce lawyer, but saw a video recently of a guy in a city close to mine getting his absolutely handed to him by his own brothers because he either threatened to or actually did call ICE on his future ex-wife to get her deported so he wouldn't have to fight for custody or pay her child support for their son. He apparently brought this up at a family get-together, leading to his brothers taking out the trash. Story 3. I am not an attorney, but my brother offed himself because I believe he could not handle his life, especially the level of control his ex had over him. After an argument, when she said she was done, she coached their daughter to accuse him of assault. Evidence from forensic interviews, the legal investigation, and my niece's own testimony confirmed that she had coached their daughter, and he was legally acquitted. She faced no real consequences other than a reprimand from the judge. My brother worked in the healthcare field as a medical equipment technician. Even after his acquittal, third-party companies that sold background reports continued to list his name, and he had to pay to have it removed from searches. During their marriage, he traveled constantly for work and was the sole financial provider. She had worked with horses her entire life, boarding and training them. He earned a solid income. They both had marital problems, both had affairs, both were involved in questionable religious groups, and they were very young when they married. They lived far from family for most of their marriage. During one of their many separations, she announced she was pregnant. 2 more children followed, and they eventually moved closer to family for support. They had established an arrangement. He would earn the money to support the family, and she would maintain her horse farm while raising and homeschooling the children. In the divorce, she used this arrangement in her favor. He paid alimony to maintain her lifestyle, child support for 3 children, and supported his own 4-bedroom home. My mother left her home and moved in with him to help care for the children while he tried to maintain his job and support 2 households. My siblings and I often listened as he described the impossible demands placed on him during his 1-week, every other week visits, daily lessons for the children in different locations that were difficult to manage on time. There was constant communication from their mother during visits, undermining my brother and criticizing his level of involvement. She documented his mistakes and used them in their ongoing custody dispute. The children were homeschooled through their elementary years and were significantly behind in core subjects and socially withdrawn. Social interactions were often uncomfortable because their education and upbringing were so different. Family gatherings were rare and tense. Her discipline seemed unreasonable, and the children were often unruly. Legal investigations into suspected abuse or neglect were conducted, but intervention was declined. She relied heavily on herbal and organic remedies and distrusted mainstream doctors, though I will admit some of her remedies were surprisingly effective. My mother found my brother. His death involved his medical knowledge and equipment. It devastated our family. He had flaws, but no one imagined he would take his own life. Both he and his ex were deeply unhappy and likely should never have been together. I understand the depth of his despair, and part of me believes I might have felt the same in his position, but the consequences of his action created overwhelming guilt, shock, anger, and grief that continue to affect our family. I do not blame him. I grieve that he felt this was the only option he had left. Story 4. It happened to some distant cousins. Their dad told their mom to visit her mom for a while. "Go on. I got this. You never do anything for yourself. I can take care of the kids." She came home to an empty house, lights off, everyone gone. He'd taken their kids and driven 1,500 miles away to be with his affair partner and filed for divorce, claiming she'd abandoned them. She never saw her children again. Story 5. Was friends with 2 brothers whose parents went through a terrible divorce. Their mother was frankly bat-crap crazy. So was their father, but he was smart, rich, and bat-crap crazy. He decided that while he was willing to support his 2 sons, he didn't want to give his STB ex-wife one single dime. So he tied up the divorce in court for years, until she ran out of money, and because he was well connected in the town that they lived in, he brought up false charges against her, which culminated in a media circus, painting her as a monster. While she was nutty, she definitely was not a monster and would never hurt her children. But the public had judged, and she was persona non grata pretty much everywhere in town. The story is longer, more horrible, and much more complicated, but the bottom line is their father used his money and his power to destroy their mother and faced almost 0 consequences in doing so. Ultimately, because their father wanted to marry his 19-year-old mistress, he was 45 at the time, he eventually let the divorce be completed. As part of the settlement, he bought his ex-wife a house in a town about an hour away for her and the kids to live in. She had custody of the kids during the week and EO weekend. On the alternate weekends, they lived with him and they settled there. This was in the pre-internet days, so no one knew of the media circus and false charges in the original town. The party line was, she was divorced and relocated in the wake of the divorce. People accepted that and moved on. Child support was given through a third-party entity, so she had no contact with her ex whatsoever. Understandable. When she dropped the kids off at their father's house, she literally let them off on the street and made them walk a quarter of a mile or so to the house. Dad lived in a huge lakefront estate, as she refused to even enter his property. You can imagine the toll all of this took on the kids. And honestly, they seem to be collateral damage in all of this. Strangely enough, we're all grown up now. We're all in our 50s. Me and the two brothers. The brothers have both been happily married for decades now and are raising families of their own. I'm guessing they learned what not to do from their parents' marriage. The other funny footnote is that the father ended up marrying his 19-year-old mistress and tired of her about 10 years later. Maybe, at 29, she was too old for him. However, she was smarter, and saving the boy's mother and made divorcing her so potentially ugly and expensive that they're still married, on paper 20-plus years later. She gets advantage of all his money and property, has nothing to do with him and has kept him from marrying anyone else. Couldn't have happened to a better guy. Story 6. I was working for a guy going through a contentious divorce. She cheated. He was still paying for all the bills at the house he was not living in because one of his kids was still living there too. One day the water department came to the office, kinda panicked, looking for him. They used property records to try to find him. Very nice of them, TBH, because the meter reader detected the house was using so much water, they feared a massive leak and potential for a sinkhole if it was the main outside. They had a crew ready. He ran over there. She had every water fixture running, every light on, etc. She apparently had been doing this for at least a month, just running up the bills to be a real a-hole. Story 7. When I was in med school, I was admitting this one patient to the hospital and asking if his code status was current. He was listed as DNR, which he did not know about because the last time he was in the hospital, he was unconscious and his wife, now ex, was acting as his medical proxy. Guess they were having issues at that time. Edit: I want to make it very clear that medically do not resuscitate does not equate do not treat. We will still treat patients to our best ability. Your code status is only in relation to what we do if you die, and often, especially for sick people, despite our best efforts, most people do not come back, and those that do often have deficits. Was it crappy that the ex-wife decided obviously against what the patient wanted? Yes. But she was not preventing anyone from providing him with medical care while alive. Story 8. Not a divorce attorney, but when I was a kid, one of my mom's friends was going through a very messy divorce. The lawyer spoke to my mom because she was a witness to the husband's abuse, and she may have to testify so her friend can have custody of her kids. She never had to testify as her friend was granted full custody with visitations. The following month, the father picked up the kids for their weekend visit and flew to Brazil. She never heard from her kids until nearly 25 years later when they returned to the US looking for her. Story 9. Not a divorce lawyer, but used to be a legal secretary in a law firm that handled a lot of divorces. We had one client whose STBX had filled out joint tax returns, had her sign them, then submitted a married filing separately instead. So per the IRS, she hadn't filed taxes for the 10 years of their marriage. Mind you, he'd done this since the first year of marriage. Meanwhile, he'd made a big deal out of them enjoying their return with day trips, etc. So she never suspected anything. It was only during their divorce proceedings, as she attempted to go back to college, he hadn't allowed her to during their marriage, that this was discovered due to her applying for financial aid. For YW, the IRS wasn't even surprised, as apparently this happens more often than anyone realizes. They ended up going after him, as she had kept copies of their joint returns. The whole thing was so damn petty and mean, we were all floored by it. Story 10. They owned a restaurant together for years and paid themselves a salary to run it, so taxes would get taken out and all that. He did the books and did not pay SS for her once. When they got divorced at retirement age, she found out she didn't pay for SS. Thank God she had some proof of what he did, and she got half his SS payments until they both died 25 years later within 6 months of each other. Story 11. With all the darkness in this thread, something a little lighter. Back in the 80s, you paid a lot for long distances and could call a number at the correct time. A woman sharing an apartment in the US with her boyfriend got a call from him when he was on a trip. He told her to move out because he had a new girlfriend. He gets home a week later and the phone is off the hook. He picks it up and it's the number for time in London. Story 12. My mom told me this. A family on our street growing up. Dublin 80s, the man was having an affair. The only choice then was separating, but he wanted the kids. He was doctor and got her committed to an asylum to get her out of the way. My mom told me it was absolutely the cruelest thing she could ever imagine. Story 13. I'm not a lawyer, but this happened to a friend Bernie recently. He and his wife have been married for over 30 years. He made a few horrible financial decisions, and she left him, lives with friends, and is suing for divorce. My friend had what he thought was a mini stroke and called friends of ours. They called an ambulance for him. Turns out that he probably did not have a TIA, but there is a problem with one of his heart valves. When his wife learned that he called friends and they called an ambulance, she called them and said, "Bernie has a living will and requested a DNR, so next time he calls you, please do not call an ambulance." Story 14. A friend who was a DA of Compton, CA, had a case where a person threw acid in the face of the other person. I am not sure if they ever were legally married, but this signified the ending of the relationship. The person was horribly disfigured for life. My friend was upset having to see what was done to the victim, and disgusted with humanity with that case. Story 15. Mine seemed trivial after reading the other stories here, but they sure felt cruel to me, so here you go. My ex and I used to do custody exchanges in a parking lot halfway between our homes. One day early in the divorce proceedings, my 3-year-old accidentally locked my van doors before getting in her dad's car, and I got locked out. My ex had a spare key on him, but instead of unlocking my car, he said, "You reap what you sow, I guess," and drove off with the kids, leaving me stranded. It was 96 degrees, and the nearest store was closed. If I hadn't had my phone in my pocket, I would have been screwed. I had to call the police to unlock my car, and they almost refused because the title was in my ex's name. Thankfully, I had a copy of the court order on my phone saying that I had used the vehicle. My poor kids spent the whole day with their dad, worried that I was still sitting in the hot parking lot because he told them I had no way to get home. Later in the divorce, when he was trying to prove that I was unstable and an unfit mother, he found one of my old journals. I had left with only what I could fit in my van, so most of my things were still in our house, and entered it as evidence in court. So I had to listen to them read all my depressed 17-year-old thoughts and feelings in court, in front of both my family and his family. Ultimately, the judge and other court officials agreed that a 20-year-old journal had absolutely no bearing on my parenting abilities or current mental state, but the whole point was cruelty, and in that he succeeded. The guardian ad litem, who had to go through the whole thing because it was entered as evidence, said she felt dirty reading it because it was such an unnecessary violation. I'm so glad I'm not his wife anymore. Story 16. Not what was asked, but it was reminded of something. A couple I knew were separated for 3 months. When it became obvious there was no saving the marriage, she filed for divorce. 3 days after being served, he died. A couple weeks later, police showed up at my door asking about them, particularly her. Come to find out, the police visited just about everyone they knew, always asking about her. Also learned, it took 9 months for a death certificate to be published. When it was issued, it came with 11 pages of post-mortem tests. Each page had about 10 different tests, blood tests, different organ and tissue tests, a very thorough autopsy that took almost a week. She of course furnished the estate lawyer with a copy of the death certificate and the 11 pages of the labs and autopsy report. The lawyer took a brief look at the papers and said to her, "You know they think, or at least suspected, you offed him." A death certificate takes about 2 or 3 days to generate, and there is no way they ran all these tests and did that thorough of an autopsy unless they suspected foul play and were looking for evidence. Edit, she was never arrested and no charges were ever filed. To the best of my knowledge, the authorities producing and allowing the release of the death certificate was the end of any suspicion. It's their way of conceding the deceased died of natural causes. I believe the estate lawyer only confirmed what she probably already knew. When days, weeks, then months go by with no progression on forensic paperwork, and friends, neighbors, co-workers, and in-laws keep informing her the police showed up asking questions, it had to at least cross her mind. They were suspicious. Story 17 was a legal assistant. The couple was planning to divorce, so they put their 3 kids in therapy. Dad fell in love with the therapist, and they were hooked up. Therapist proceeds to spend the next several months convincing the kids that their mom actually hates them and doesn't want them. Divorce proceeds and the 3 kids want nothing to do with mom, so dad gets custody. Years later, the oldest kid wishes up to the therapist's plot and gets in touch with mom. Mom reconnects with all 3 kids and starts custody battle to get them back. After exposing the therapist, she loses her license and mom wins custody. While mom and kids were out to dinner, dad and therapist torch mom's house. It was still ongoing, but I quit and never heard anything else about it. I hope mom and kids are healing and doing well. Story 18. I am not lawyer, but when I was a kid, my parents had a nasty divorce. My mom told everyone that she was having an affair with a 20-year-old at my brother's birthday party. Weeks after she moved out, she waited until the house was completely empty. I was at school and my dad was at work. She broke in and stole everything. I mean everything from our beds to plugs. She had moving van. One of our neighbors texted my dad asking what was going on, and by the time we got there, it was too late. The house was completely empty. She even stole my dogs. We had to call the police and went to court so many times. She was told by the courts to give back my dogs, and she told them she put them down. I haven't spoken to her since that day. One birthday, she burned all my childhood photos and gave me the ashes. She even had the nerve to come back to the house for a month because she hadn't taken the stuff in the attic. She is a very evil woman. Story 19. We had a 1-year-old at the time that I found out about his lengthy affair. He became violent when I tried to leave, but I was able to get away with my child, a few important documents, and my cat that I brought into the marriage. Between then and when I was able to arrange for family to come help me get the rest, he threw out all of my original work from my time getting 2 degrees, destroyed every book of mine and the rest of my clothes, and starved our other pets to death, geckos and a snake, all while continuing to see the other woman. Never once asked about our child. In the years after, he used the courts to financially abuse me, saying it could all stop if I just came back. He fought tooth and nail for the house, which I gave up without a fight, only to immediately stop paying the mortgage. He destroyed it inside and let it go into foreclosure before my name was removed, despite being court-ordered to remove it. He also fought for full custody, telling me to my face he'd use every second he was given to teach our child to hate me. He was not awarded more than some weekend visitation. His affair had been years long, and he told me repeatedly that she was his true love. They lasted 4 weeks in an actual relationship after I left. She dumped him. My child and I are doing well now. Story 20. The divorce is still ongoing, but they are parents of minor children. One of the kids suffers from depression, so during the happier days of their marriage, they got her a dog to train. It helped a lot to give her a friend, companion, and basically a goal. The dog is incredibly well trained. In the divorce proceedings, Dad got custody of the kids and the dog. He proceeded to feed the dog approximately a cup of puppy food a day and keeps the dog outside only. The dog has never lived outside before and is a full-grown German Shepherd mix. He knew the kids would complain to Mom. Neighbors noticed the dog getting scary skinny and started tossing food to the dog over the fence. They called the police multiple times, but the police only took it seriously once the dog was too weak to get the fence scraps. Dad now has to take the dog to the local humane society every week for weigh-ins. The dog was down 20 pounds from when it was first granted to Dad. Just recently, Dad decided he wanted to adopt the dog instead. The kids obviously hate their dad. Story 21. Not a lawyer. My ex constantly threatened to call CPS on me and make me homeless to take our kids. He stopped paying for daycare during divorce proceedings because the judge left it off temporary orders, then dragged his feet in court. So for 2 years, I had to rent rooms in my home just to pay for daycare to be able to work. He'd insinuate I was negligent, stopped paying child support constantly just to screw with me, and didn't care that our kids and I were going to food banks to eat. On top of that, it started with him telling me we had no money for groceries, so he could hire hookers. I got our marital home for a steal of a buyout without a refinance. 50-50 custody, but with a provision, if he picks up more teamwork, that I can take him to court as a change in circumstances. He lasted less than 6 months and wants to go again. And our son is waiting for the day I can go to court, and he can voice his opinion to stay with me during the week solely. Before anyone says I sound happy about all this, because there's always some do-gooder wanting to point out, I'm a B. Personally, I think rapists and abusers deserve what they get. Story 22. Second story, since my first one was bleak. This wasn't petty, but it was weird. This is the story of the custody of the pet raccoon. Let's call the raccoon Rocky. The divorcing couple had raised Rocky since he was a baby as a pet raccoon. Rocky had custom clothes, multiple cat condos, and was litter box trained and toilet trained. When the couple got divorced, they had a giant fight over custody of the raccoon. I'm talking comparing medical bills, who let the raccoon into the garbage, and who spent more time on Rocky's nails. It was hilarious and petty. Ultimately, we had to reach a visitation schedule with Rocky and a list of house rules, including sending Rocky to each household with his clothes, maintaining a specific diet, and providing evidence that the garbage was secured against the raccoon. It was my favorite case for a long time. And yes, I got to meet the raccoon. He was a good boy. Story 23. Not a lawyer. My partner of 10 years got into debt and was very panicked about it. Most of her debt came from going to Cancun with her friends. I told her I would pay the bills until she got out of debt. I put my debts from grad school on hold, which she called a waste of money. Ivy League software engineering. She didn't tell me when she got out of debt, and she started stacking money. She then cheated on me several times with multiple people to end the relationship. With the money she saved, she went with her boyfriend to see Fish on New Year's Eve in New York, and then for a few days in Tampa. In Tampa, she went to some EDM shows and did hard drugs. She told me she was visiting her mother. Obviously, she doesn't have money to live on her own, so after this week-long bang session with her boyfriend, she came home. Edit, I did not kick her out. She was my partner for 10 years, and I love her very much. She just falls under the category of people I love that I can't be in a relationship with. When she gets on her feet, she can leave. Some of our mutual friends started wondering if she had had some head trauma or suffered a psychotic break. Most of them stopped talking to her. She's in a rough spot. I will do fine. I am taking the time to get in shape and change careers. I am tall, educated, and loving. All my other partners have spoken 3 languages, had PhDs, and been smoking hot. I will be fine. Story 24. Not a lawyer, but the crappiest thing was what my aunt did to punish my uncle, even though he was dead. Their marriage was his second and longest of his 9 marriages or more. We only know of the 9, and the one that lasted the longest, about 10 years. In his final days, when he was slowly dying from advanced COPD, he lived in a trailer park in the desert, and a kindly neighbor lady looked after him. She did his shopping, made him meals, etc. She was in her 80s and essentially destitute herself, so there was no romantic involvement. She was just a good person. My father was executor and only beneficiary of his will, and when all was said and done, my uncle died with about $300 to his name. My father called my aunt to tell her of his death. She had had 0 contact with my uncle for years, and he told her he was going to give the neighbor lady the $300. She literally lost her head over it and threatened to sue my father over this piddling amount of money, because her ex-husband owed her an ounce of flesh apparently, even after death. To be clear, my uncle was no peach. He gave as much as he took in the bad spouse department, but the behavior of my aunt appalled my father. My father gave her the money to make her go away, and also gave the neighbor lady $1,000, and told her my uncle had bequeathed it to her because, unlike my uncle and my aunt, he was a fair and compassionate person. Story 25. I was representing wife, dealing with custody, child support, etc. They had already been separated for about 2 years when we went to trial, and my client was in a new relationship. Her boyfriend sat in court. Just finished trial, and while we were taking a break, her ex walked up to her boyfriend in the body of the court and sucker punched him in the face, right in front of a police guard. Arrested on the spot. I won the trial. Story 26. Not a divorce lawyer, but worked as a paralegal for a few years. The pettiest thing I saw was someone who demanded the family photo albums in the settlement, then mailed their ex photocopies of every picture with themselves cut out. Took actual time and effort to be that spiteful. The ones that got to me the most were when kids got used as weapons though. That stuff changes people in ways that take years to undo. Story 27. One client deliberately hid her husband's terminal cancer diagnosis during the divorce, so he'd sign an agreement leaving her almost everything. When he found out months later, it was too late to contest, and he was too sick to fight anyway. The lawyer who represented him said he'll never forget the man's face when he realized his ex had basically sentenced him to die broke and alone. Stuff like that reminds you that hate can be deadlier than any disease. Story 28. Not a lawyer, but when my mom divorced my dad, she told him he could take whatever he wanted, he just couldn't touch me in my brother's room. He took everything that could have value to her and would be worth most money, wedding silverware, TV, and stuff like that. Then we had someone break in December 23, 2019, where they took jewelry, expensive perfumes, sentimentalism, Christmas gifts, etc. Then my mom got everything appraised for reimbursement from the insurance company. She got the price set a bit higher by someone we knew, and somehow my dad found out how much she got and demanded half even though he had no right to the assets and he knew it was going to go to me and my brother. Roughly $7,150 in total. $3,575 for him. Also used my mental health to his favor to hurt my mom. He's a cruel man. Edit. He also recently demanded around $530 from me the other week for the gym membership he paid on my behalf because it was my sport and I turned the legal adult age where I live in 2024, but I couldn't do anything to the membership because he was the account holder. He said that didn't matter and I should pay it. Story 29. I worked at an office building in the cafeteria. One of the senior VPs came down for coffee frequently. Nice woman, straight long black hair. She introduced me to her 3 kids one Christmas Eve. A few months later, I hadn't seen her and asked one of her coworkers where she was. Having gone through a divorce over that Christmas break, husband lost his crap drinking, put the kids in the car to take them home, lit the car on fire and ran it into their house. All 4 dead on impact. New Year's Eve, she was concussed from the roof falling on her. Kids died 10 feet away. She had to come back to work after 90 days. I delivered her coffee to her office, made sure I didn't run into her. There was no awkward moment. She sent me a thank you note and asked me to keep doing that daily so she didn't have to talk to anyone, so I did. Finally, she saw her a week later. Her hair had turned stone white, not gray. White, her face was gaunt. She had lost a ton of weight, which shouldn't have been possible since she couldn't have been more than 120 pounds before. She retired shortly after and moved in with her parents. Horrifying. Story 30. Following a marital breakdown due to his own acts of DV, the husband tried to have his daughter kicked out of university by contacting the grants department claiming she'd fraudulently received a higher amount than she should have. The parents were separated when the kid applied, reconciled for a few months, and that is where his claim of fraud comes from. The mother works but couldn't afford 4 years of tuition Amalis accommodation, so this grant is essential. The kicker, he texted the kid to wish her luck finding a job in McDonald's. Guess how much he contributed to the kid's education? Story 31. One coworker thought she had a good relationship with her ex. Then one night he came over to take care of the kids after bedtime so she could go out with friends. No text messages or emails. All agreements between her and him were made via phone and in person. About an hour after she left, he called the police and said he came over to the house because he had been concerned that his ex was leaving the children home alone at night, and when he came to knock on the door, one of his kids got out of bed to answer the door and he couldn't find his ex or an adult anywhere in the house. Story 32. A family friend found out he was sleeping with one of her friends, so just before divorce, she hid raw fish and meat all around his house. In the vents, under the sofa cushion, he even found raw chicken under floorboards. How did he find it? Because maggots and other bugs were crawling up from the gaps. He still hasn't found all the meat, and his house still smells like rotten flesh. It's been months. She also poured sand into his drawers with all his clothes, and he still finds sand in pockets. Story 33. Not a divorce lawyer, but my dad is a contractor who attends a yearly safety class so that he has some type of permit to handle chemicals, poisons he sometimes uses to clear trees and brush out of areas before they start work. At one of those classes, he was talking to a guy who had recently gone through a divorce. Guy explained that he had spent years carefully building and maintaining a beautiful lawn at his home, got divorced, and his ex got the house. So he started going by late at night when it rained and threw poison pellets throughout the yard. The rain would quickly dissolve the pellets, so there was no trace of what he did. Turned the whole yard into a dead wasteland in just a few weeks. Story 34. I moved to another state, and my soon-to-be ex-husband, who was also moving there a few weeks later, was supposed to bring my 35 years of belongings with him. I had flown in with the kids. We had been married for 12 years and together for 15, and it seemed like things would be amicable. Instead, he put everything I owned, including irreplaceable items like yearbooks and my kids' baby memories, literally everything I had accumulated by 35 into a storage unit, and refused to tell me where it was. His dad had just died and left him a huge inheritance. He essentially disappeared for 3 years, paid zero child support, and when they finally came for his driver's license and passport, he called me crying because only I could stop it. Meanwhile, I was caring for my dying grandmother full-time, working part-time jobs, raising 2 little ones alone and on food stamps, while he was taking luxury vacations. We had never taken a vacation because he was always out of work. For the next 15 years, he repeatedly took me back to court in a mostly successful attempt to owe zero child support, claiming multiple disabilities, including not being able to walk. Fast forward to my son's 18th birthday. He has not seen our son since 2018, and he texts the kids to announce that he is releasing a record. He says he will be on all the social media platforms teaching drumming. He even posted a big unboxing video of himself opening a stack of records. By this stage, my anger was long gone, and it was honestly the comedy I needed and deserved. It was flat out terrible. But when he posted a video of himself walking up to give money to a homeless musician in a grocery store parking lot, using the hashtag charity and helping fellow musician fathers, I could not help myself. I commented, "Oh hey, that's awesome. Your son graduates in June and wow, the expenses are stacking up." It was funny how quickly that video disappeared, and it gave me great joy when he removed the TikTok link from his webpage after seeing that my parrot got more likes on one silly video than he had on all of his combined. Story 35. So funny story. I read by a lawyer. He said the craziest divorce case he had was 2 dentists who were married. Apparently they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't know the number, but I think under 300,000 above 200. Fighting over 3 trees. They weren't even very large, apparently. The lawyer said, and that's when I realized I should have been a dentist. No idea if it's true, but people might get a kick out of it with all the hate in the post. Story 36. I'm not a lawyer, but all the recent dog stories brought something up for me. My ex and I had a dog together. When I filed for divorce, I moved into a hotel because I was getting abused. The hotel didn't allow pets, and he told me he'd keep our dog safe at the house. I believed him. After about 2 weeks, when I didn't come back, he got angry. Without telling me, he drove our dog to another state and gave him away. When I finally went back to the house, all of his things were gone. I remember just standing there realizing he was gone. I begged my ex to tell me where he was. I just wanted to see him one more time. He refused. I eventually figured it out. Later, he admitted he thought if he got rid of the dog, I'd come back, and that we could just get another one. But he wasn't just a dog to me. He was my baby. Story 37. My ex filed an innocent spouse claim with the IRS 2 weeks after I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. It went to arbitration, and I ultimately lost because I couldn't prove he knew about the income. We owned a business together, and I was taxed on money I never received. During the marriage, they could argue it was joint income, but we lived apart for 2 years, and I never saw a dime as he locked me out of the business account. I also had a full-time job, and most of those taxes, I overpaid less in the taxes for the business. I just took a withdrawal from my 401k to pay the taxes, as every month when I wrote the installment check was a reminder of how badly he had done me wrong. Story 38. I'm a claims adjuster, not a lawyer, but I don't think it can get crueler than this. And to be honest, it's probably good for me to tell the story. I never want to bump people out with stuff like this, but it takes a toll. An early to mid-20s couple had been married for a couple years and owned a lovely house. The husband started to believe she was cheating on him. Even if she had been, nothing would justify this, but I truly believe she wasn't. I'm only mentioning that because he seemed paranoid, and given his age, etc., I think he was exhibiting early signs of schizophrenia. He wanted everything bad that could happen to a person to happen to her. He ultimately went into their basement and shot himself. But first, he went around their house, setting several fires that would take a little while to really get the house burning. He was fully aware that insurance would not cover this because it was an intentional act. He just wanted to make sure she was not just a widow but homeless and penniless. Story 39. A customer had a very sour divorce he went through while we were working together. A couple of years after the divorce, he had a Disney trip planned with his kid, around 10 or 11 years old, and the kid's mother gave the okay. Mind you, this is in the third world, so it's kind of a big deal. Visas, notarized authorizations to leave the country with the kid, expensive tickets, etc., a year's worth of planning. On the flight day, he went to pick the kid up and she told him she wouldn't let him travel. How friggin' evil do you have to be to use the kid as ammo? Story 40. Not a lawyer, just one of the kids who watched it unfold. He took all her photos, baby pictures of her, old family pics, us as babies, and destroyed them all. Plus any old baby memory stuff, like there's nothing left. He took and hid all our kids' toys, refused to let her take any with her for us, and claimed we needed them there for when we visited him. Then he put them all in a pile, took a Polaroid, sent said picture in the mail addressed to my brother and me, 7 and 10 at the time, and let us know that this was the last time we'd see our toys. He gave them all away and said it was all our mom's fault. My mom recorded us learning to talk on cassette tapes. Each of us had a few with, I guess, various times of us babbling and talking as toddlers. He did give her those tapes. After, he recorded court appearances / divorce proceedings over every single one. I could keep going, but I'm going to stop for my mental health. Good ride. Story 41. My uncle was in an abusive marriage in his early 20s. His ex-wife beat him, tried to poison him twice, and wrote out an entire plan to off him while he slept. When he finally went through with the divorce, his ex made a huge deal over custody of their 3-year-old daughter together. She kept delaying it and would essentially use their daughter to get him to give her money. Finally, he takes her to court, and the judge orders a DNA test. As they are leaving the courthouse, my uncle hugs the little girl goodbye, and the ex-wife says, "This is the last time you'll see her." He shrugs her off, saying that the courts will decide that. She says, "No, you won't see her again because she isn't yours." Sure as hell, the test comes back, and he's not the father. Years later, the girl is 18 and shows up to the hospital where my uncle is a surgeon. She goes on and on about what a crappy dad he is, and how he makes all this money and hasn't paid a single cent of child support. Turns out her mom told her that he was her dad. Story 42. A friend of mine had a very old dog that he had since she was a pup. She was his best friend and well-known and liked by everyone. When the divorce was finalized on terms she didn't like, she kidnapped the healthy dog, had it put down and cremated, then sent him the ashes. In my small town, the backlash was brutal when everyone found out what she had done out of spite, so much that all the pubs and shops banned her. People would shout abusing her, and her parents' businesses went under because their name became so toxic no one would go near them. Story 43. My ex-husband would bring dates home when we were newly separated but still owned a home together. He got mad when there was a tropical storm and I didn't move out of our house the day I planned to. He started running around with a drill, taking the last of my stuff apart. Got in my face while holding said drill and said, "You're leaving today." I ended up having to call the police, the first time I ever did, to get him to calm down. He screamed obscenities and slammed the front door, then went right to the courthouse and filed an eviction against me. It was immediately dismissed because we were still married, but it still shows on my record and can be an issue with landlords. Before I left, he also started hiding gifts I'd received or mutual items from our relationship so I couldn't take anything. He was bad in the relationship, but his full colors came out during the divorce. It was a traumatic time. Story 44. My ex had a psychologist call me out of the blue during the divorce, telling me he was extremely concerned about my well-being and wanted to see me immediately. I asked who he was. He worked with my ex? I refused. I'm guessing the goal was to get me admitted to a psychiatric ward. Another time, a doctor I was seeing for health issues told me after I filed for divorce that my medical issue could be resolved by surgery, but my ex told him not to tell me, so he didn't. My ex did take me to another friend of his, who told me that if I lost 30 pounds, my medical issue would go away. This was false. My ex just wanted me to lose weight. Story 45. Reading these makes me feel a little better about my divorce. My ex got engaged to a woman while still married to me. He asked me to leave our home together because he needed space to work on being a better husband, and instead used that time to move his mistress and her child in. After I finally caught him, he first tried to lie about it. Once it was actually decided we'd divorce, he posted a photo shoot to his Instagram captioned "Hard Launch" to show off their engagement photos. Story 46. A friend of my brother's cheated on his girlfriend. When she left their flat, she blocked up every plug hole and turned the taps on. He was at work for 5 hours with every tap running in his flat. He returned home early after one of the neighbors called him, worried about the amount of noise his dog was making. On his return, his flat was flooded, and his dog was howling on the kitchen table. She did 5,000 pounds of damage as the water sank through the carpet and underlay all the way to the floorboards. His furniture and exposed electrical equipment were destroyed. She also took his PlayStation. She used tissue in the plug holes and overflows, bulked with cotton wool. Story 47. My nephew got married at age 20 and had 3 kids with his first wife. He left her for a woman with 3 kids, divorced his first wife, married the second woman, and had another child with her. The second wife's oldest was 12 when he became her stepfather. As soon as the oldest turned 18, he got her pregnant and ran off with her, eventually divorcing her mother. He had been grooming her for years, walking out of the lives of his 4 kids. Story 48. I'm a nurse in a hospital. A very good-looking but clearly psychopathic new resident moved to our hospital on the West Coast from the East, where he'd been living with his fiancée while in med school. He brought their 2 dogs with him, as his fiancée was going to follow once she tied up her affairs. Well, he met a cute young woman, broke his engagement, and had the 2 dogs euthanized. That was about 25 years ago, and I'll never get over it. Story 49. She kicked him out 2 weeks after my client's dad passed away. She changed the locks and called the cops on him when he forced a door open to try and retrieve the urn. Unfortunately, she had thrown it in the trash several days before, but she didn't admit it immediately. He yelled at her until the cops arrived, believing they would understand why he was upset, and forced her to tell him where the urn was. My client was arrested, and this was used as an excuse to severely limit his time with his kids. Story 50. Not a divorce lawyer, but a friend of my wife had a horrible divorce that seems like a TV show. Her husband had me, which stopped him from being able to work. She was a teacher, and she basically went to work all day while he played games. We went to their wedding, where the only thing I remember was him crying in the bathroom after cutting the cake. Anyway, one day she came home and the house was fully empty. He'd left a note saying he couldn't do this anymore, and that he'd reconciled with his ex. He'd taken absolutely everything, their bed, all the clothes, even hers, and was basically uncontactable. A little while later, divorce papers and a note from a law firm had come through. He wanted the house, on the grounds that he was kept like a prisoner. He'd sent emails to everyone she worked with, all of her friends, including me, to basically say she was a monster and that he feared for his life. It was posted online on the school's Facebook page everywhere. His me had magically disappeared, and when this went to court, it came as a surprise that it was even a thing. The court case didn't last long, and he had to pay court fees and damages based on his actions, with a whole thing happening after because he'd basically been caught in several lies. Despite all of this, it absolutely broke her, and she quit her job and left teaching altogether. We didn't hear from her much, and she moved away while he's still with his ex and has kids now. We heard that she's got a new husband and has kids, so I hope she's managed to find some peace. Story 51. Not a lawyer, but my mom works for a vet, and a man came in with his elder golden retriever. He said that she was not having a good life being that old, and that he was deploying without anyone to take the dog. So he came into the vet to have her put down. My mom looked at the dog and elder to be sure, but not in obvious pain, and still a happy girl, and couldn't put her down. So she looked him up on FB. She found out that he had got the family dog in the divorce. It looked like he was putting her down to spite the family. So she took his money and the dog. The dog, Tara, lived with my mom for 3 more years. Story 52. Worked customer service for a life insurance company. Had to tell a number of women, usually, that the cash value life policy their ex gave them in the divorce had no available cash value because he had taken it as a loan right before the divorce and before the ownership in the policy was switched to her name. I usually got the call when the policy lapsed and the IRS wanted the taxes on the cash value, which of course was no longer there due to the loan. Unfortunately, she is now the named owner and responsible for the taxes. Horrid calls to handle. Story 53. Not a lawyer, but watched my aunt's divorce play out. Her ex deliberately ran up debt on joint credit cards right before filing, knowing she'd be on the hook for half. I bought a boat, electronics, all kinds of stuff, and hid it at a friend's house. The judge caught on eventually, but it took months to sort out, and she was stuck making minimum payments the whole time. The financial manipulation side of divorces is wild, and people rarely talk about it. Story 54. As a paralegal, one of the worst things I ever saw anyone do with regards to divorce/parental rights was a guy who kept insisting on shared custody, even though it was clear he was unfit to care for the kids. Pushed and pushed to get the kids for the weekend. Halfway through the first day, he texted his ex to tell her he dropped the kids at a gas station and told her where to go pick them up. Apparently, he had his fill with them and couldn't be bothered to drop them off at her house. He no longer has parental authority over his kids. Story 55. Not a divorce lawyer, but before my mother and father split up, they used to show and breed dogs. When they inevitably pass away, my dad would get a nice fancy urn for their ashes with their name on it and place them in a small wooden shrine in our house. During the divorce proceedings, my mother was convinced my dad was seeing another woman. He wasn't. He was just seeing a woman therapist. So she smashed the wooden shrine in our house and defaced the front of the urns so you couldn't tell whose urn was which. And then dumped all the urns in my dad's car when he was working. My mother never told me she did this, and told me my dad took them away when I was in school. I never found out until she kicked me out after I graduated high school and went to live with my dad and asked what the hell happened to the urns. I do not talk with my mother any more than strictly necessary. Story 56. Compared to most of these stories, this is tame. My friend got divorced a few years ago, and he found out his wife had been planning it for years. He worked away from home most of the time, and she looked after the finances. She found a less than scrupulous lawyer who talked to her through how she could take him for as much as possible. She convinced him they should buy rental property, which turned out to be where she planned to live after the divorce. She suddenly developed a collection of difficult-to-test for medical conditions so she could claim not to be able to work, except for one very specific job she wanted to do. The one that left me quite impressed, though, was the cash grab. She would get cash back at tills every day while shopping. It wasn't uncommon for her to get $500 a day this way. In total, she withdrew somewhere around $300,000 over about 3 years. She told the judge she'd spent it on food shopping, and he believed her. The cash was never found. Story 57. My fiancé at the time called the police after an argument and told them I was out of control and pushed him off the bed. I got arrested, something no one in my life could or would ever believe in me. I was not allowed to have contact for a week with him or my home. He took my keys in the meantime, so I never was able to go home. I wasn't allowed to take any of our joint money. He held most of my items hostage for months, didn't allow me to take anything we owned together, never got to see my home again. We were together for 7 years with a 4-year-old. He moved on within a month. I only had $800 to my name because I had just gotten my tax return. I only worked part-time so I could care for our son and home. It's insane to me that someone can do to you in the blink of an eye and there's almost nothing you can do about any of it. I still struggle with everything and it's been 10 years. Story 58. Not a lawyer, but I had a coworker whose wife left him for the guy she was cheating on him with and had a kid with. This happened 3 years after the kid was born, and he found out she was cheating on him with a coworker and the kid wasn't his. Anyways, every year he sued her for full custody, which cost him around $5,000, more like $13,000 today's money, for a kid he didn't even want. This forced her to get a better attorney, which cost her more money. It was insane when I heard about him and asked him about it. He was planning on dumping the kid off in a boarding school, so he couldn't see his mother growing up at all if he had won. He also said the entire argument on her side was the kid wasn't his and he had no right to ask the court for full custody. His counter-argument was then he shouldn't have been paying for child support and wanted every nickel back. Our system in the US is just screwed. Story 59. My mother started the divorce after his second DUI. He agreed to move out and go to AA meetings, stopped going after 2 meetings and forced himself back in the house and refused to leave. She was stuck with him for another year because he refused to move out and refused to sign the papers. After his 3rd DUI, he went to prison. She moved out because he threatened to move back in again and wouldn't sign paperwork. He fought tooth and nail for the house, eventually signing the paperwork and defeated the house. Hurt himself on the job and faked a disability so he didn't have to pay more than $200 child support. Then they didn't make payments on the house and had it foreclosed on. He purposefully ruined her credit and forced me and my sister out of a stable home just to get back at her. And he later got back into his old job and began making what he was making before. So instead of her getting close to $800 for child support, she was stuck only getting $200 till we both turned 18. Oh, and he also lied to us about my mother breaking up the family and lying to us so we would hate her. Story 60. My dad was a family law attorney, and one of his clients was diagnosed with colon cancer and had to have a section of his large intestine removed. While he was in surgery, his wife left him and cleaned out their house. Took literally everything including the appliances. She didn't say anything to anyone, not even her friends, some of whom were at the hospital in the waiting room to comfort their friend who they expected was going to be there, So when she was MIA, people were legitimately worried that something had happened to her. So he wakes up from a life-changing surgery to be met with the news that his wife is missing. He gives someone the keys to his house so they can go check there for her, and they find it empty with a note saying she wants a divorce as soon as he can give her one. Story 61. Back in the 90s, this happened to a family friend of ours. Her husband divorced her as he was sleeping with his receptionist. This was shortly after superannuation was introduced for retirement, and back then there were some huge loopholes that have since been closed off or limited. So back then you had no limits on your voluntary superannuation contributions, meaning if you had a really high income, you could put money into superannuation to get the discounted tax rates as it was a tax-deductible contribution and had a much lower tax on it than income. Superannuation contributions back then, both voluntary and the mandatory ones, were not included in child support calculations. Her ex-husband is a dentist, and for the 11 years until the youngest kid turned 18, he submitted a taxable income of $9,000 a year, with $400,000 to $500,000 superannuation contributions, and paid essentially no child support ever, just despite his ex-wife and his kids, because the oldest kids during the divorce said they would prefer living with their mom. Story 62. I am going through a divorce right now in CA, and we are currently fighting over custody of our dog. I have seen some terrible, tearful stories about animal custody, and I need to share my story, which is not over yet. I originally thought that I would leave the dog to him because he was the one who always wanted the dog, and he had to talk me into getting her. I was trying to be fair to him after we separated, but our dog bonded with me, and he was always jealous of that. For example, he would scream at me when I came back home, and our dog got too excited, in his opinion, to see me. He would say that I should ignore her so she would not get too attached to me, and that she behaved too excitedly around me. To other people who saw us with the dog, it was clear that she preferred me. When they shared their observations with us, it made him angry. Toward the very end of our marriage, when we were sleeping in different rooms, our dog would sleep with me. He would come into my room, physically lift the dog. She is a 70-pound Labrador because she refused to go with him, take her to his bed, and close the door so the dog would not sneak back to me during the night. At the same time, he demanded that I walk her when he felt lazy, which was often. If the dog needed a bath, I was the one who did it. If I made plans to go hiking with my friends and he knew I was taking the dog, at the last minute he might say, "Don't take my dog," even though he knew how much she enjoyed the outdoors. Those are just a few examples. When we first separated, the dog was with him most of the time. He would bring her to me only when he needed it. If I asked him to let me have the dog for a couple of days or a week, he would decide whether I could have her or not. He could demand her back anytime he wanted, and I had to obey him if I wanted to see her again. He was using the dog as leverage to exercise control over me. We got into a fight over the dog because he demanded to pick her up immediately, and he physically pushed me to the ground in front of a witness. He is twice as heavy as I am and much taller. I filed a restraining order, and I kept the dog for 4 months until we signed a stipulation that allows me to have the dog for 1 week per month. But after I transferred the dog to him in September, he refused to follow the court order on dog visitation. So I saw her only in December, when we had our first contempt hearing, and the judge explicitly ordered him to give me the dog the same day for 3 days. My STBX had to do it, but when it was my week the next month, he refused again. I am now filing my third attempt and a request for an order modification to get full custody of the dog. I also checked with our vet, and he missed her annual appointment for important vaccinations. My daughter recently saw her, and the dog has fleas. Based on that, I believe she should be in my full-time custody, not because I want revenge, but for the dog's well-being. My STBX has chronic gout, and when it flares up, it is painful for him to walk. But our dog is high energy and benefits from long, active walks that help control her weight. Sometimes he cannot walk her. For additional context, we have an adult son who chooses not to speak to him, and a 16-year-old daughter who chose to live with me and have minimal contact with him. He is voluntarily unemployed, so he does not pay child support, but the court imputed child support to him at over $1,000 per month based on his past W-2s and his behavior in court in front of the judge. We have 5 court dates scheduled in the next 3 months, 2 regarding contempt of the dog visitation order, 1 motion to compel financial disclosures, 1 child support hearing, and 1 hearing regarding the restraining order. I do not hate him. At least I try not to, because when you hate someone, you hurt only yourself. A quote from the movie I watched yesterday, The Ghosts of Mississippi. That is my motto, and when I feel anger, I try to remember that. I try to let go of the dog for the sake of peace, but I miss her. And the grief is real. I have dreams where I see her with him at a dog park. She runs to me, and I grab her. But in real life, I am choosing a legal, methodical, non-emotional way to get her back. I am trying to be ready for any outcome. If the judge grants him full custody, then so be it. I did everything I could, and I did it in good faith. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.